This is the Capitol Rundown.
Caused quite a stir, and as a result, we had a lame duck session in the Michigan House, basically scrubbed for the entire week.
I don't accept that Joe Biden won anything yet.
They are undermining the legitimacy, or trying to do so, of the incoming administration.
It's all straight ahead. The Capitol Rundown starts now.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Siobhan Klepfer. It has been one wild week in Michigan politics, a week unlike one we've ever seen before or will ever see again. It started with the Michigan legislature being lampooned on Saturday Night Live, along with Rudy Giuliani, who also brought the coronavirus with him to Lansing last week. And this was all happening in the midst of an investigation by the State Office of Occupational Health and Safety because of reports that dozens of lawmakers and staffers tested positive for COVID. This, of course, happening within a legislature that refuses to make lawmakers wear masks. And we haven't even gotten to the 15 Michigan lawmakers who apparently say that our election was illegal and that all of our 5.5 million votes should be tossed, and seem to admit it was because they didn't do their own jobs. So Kiera Lake sat down with our Capitol correspondent Tim Skubic to sort through it all.
We know that Rudy Giuliani, President Trump's lawyer, tested positive recently for COVID-19, and this was just days following his visit after Lansing. Can you just talk about how that announcement kind of played out here at the Capitol?
Yeah, well, it sent a real chill through the Capitol as staffers and lawmakers and all sorts of hangers-on were concerned. Geez, oh, Pete, was I exposed to COVID vis-a-vis Rudy Giuliani? Now, the Giuliani people were very quick to try to kill this story by saying he was not contagious when he was in Michigan. However, the Ingham County Health Director said, you know, just as a precaution, that might be true, but you know what? Maybe you ought to isolate, maybe you ought to be tested. And there was some great concern raised about that. The Speaker of the House, Lee Chatfield, tried to tap the whole thing down, basically say this is not a runway spread problem that we have. He contracted the coronavirus after he got back to Washington, D.C., but yet there he was sitting in a committee room that was packed with people, many of them without masks, including Mr. Giuliani, and some Republicans on the committee. And so it caused quite a stir. And as a result, we had a lame duck session in the Michigan House, basically scrubbed for the entire week.
All right, well, now that we have learned that the Michigan Occupational Safety and Health Administration is investigating the House of Representatives, that information came out, but we don't really know the details about this complaint. Can you just kind of share your thoughts on that?
Well, let's put this in perspective, okay? We've been trying to get our arms around the extent of COVID in the legislature. The Michigan Senate, to its credit, has been a little more forthcoming over the past couple of weeks, identifying 3 state senators that we know of that had the virus, tested positive, and 16 staffers. Now, we've been trying to keep track of the number of lawmakers. They've been a little more stingy on releasing this information, but now for the first time, the Speaker's office confirmed that we had at least 8 lawmakers that have tested positive out of a field of 109, so it's a small percentage, and about 18 staffers. There's no question that COVID is alive and well in the legislature. The extent of its aliveness, if you will, can be debated.
Let's talk about the new lawsuit that we're hearing about. It involves those 15 Michigan legislators. They're challenging the election results. We're seeing it here in Michigan, but also in Georgia and also in Pennsylvania.
Well, our good friends down in the Lone Star State did not like the election results, and the question is, who cares? If some people are raising the point, how does Texas go to the Supreme Court and try to undo a Michigan election? I don't know. We're about to find out. But now they're hoping to get before the Supreme Court and get them to somehow overturn the election in Michigan and 3 other states. We have an indication as to what the court might do. They had a Pennsylvania case on this point earlier, which they refused to take. The popular wisdom, which is often wrong, suggests that the Supremes will rebut this thing and it'll be over before it's over.
Kiera, Tim, thank you. Coming up next on the rundown, it's not just state lawmakers who want to toss out Michigan's votes. Several of our own congressmen want to do it too. And you'll hear from one of them and the thoughts of a CBS White House correspondent when the Capitol Rundown continues. Welcome back. We've had an election. The votes have been counted and in some cases recounted. All 50 states have certified their election results. Joe Biden won more than 270 Electoral College votes, and the Electoral College will meet in state capitals around the country on Monday to cast their votes. So it's over, right? Well, not according to Michigan Congressman Tim Walberg.
I don't accept that Joe Biden won anything yet until we've exhausted all the resources that are legal to make sure that the legal votes are counted and the illegal votes aren't counted. The question I ask myself, how much fraud am I willing to accept in our election process? And I hope the answer for all of us is that we're not willing to accept any of it. Will there be some? Undoubtedly. There always has been. But right now we have concerns, what we've seen in Michigan and Wayne County and Detroit in the counting process, what we've seen in Pennsylvania, Georgia, Nevada, Arizona, that ought to cause us some concerns. And while I don't want to continue hanging on forever, and while I don't necessarily want to take the election away from Joe Biden if he won it, and it can ultimately through the Electoral College be decided that way, I want to make sure that we use all of the resources necessary to make sure that this doesn't happen for the future at the very least. We get to the bottom of it, we settle it, and people, whether it's in Georgia on January 5th or Michigan back in the next elections, can count on the electoral process to be safe, and every vote will count.
The Rundown talked to CBS White House correspondent Paula Reed this week, and we covered several topics. And one of the things I asked her about was her reaction to Congressman Walberg's take. Here's some of what she said about why this is happening and what it might mean for the future.
We talked to a local member of Congress this week, a Republican, who said, "I don't accept that Joe Biden won anything yet," and cited the ongoing legal process. So how much longer do you think the legal process and Republicans can hold out on this issue? How long do you think they can go on?
Well, probably as long as they continue to make money, because we see that judges are consistently tossing these legal challenges, just saying, look, these aren't supported by evidence. If they had more evidence and these challengers were making their way through the courts more frequently, if they had a diversified portfolio of legal challenges, they could delay this for quite some time. But again, it does not appear that there's any viable way to litigate their way to 270 votes. But even these failed legal efforts have resulted in significant fundraising. They've raised over $200 million since Election Day by claiming that this was a stolen or rigged election. So it's likely that as long as that money keeps coming in, that's how long this will continue to be fought in courts and in other venues like local political houses.
How do you think the unwillingness to recognize the legitimacy and the results of the election by many Republicans is going to affect President-elect Biden's ability to advance his agenda?
It does make a dent. The president, his supporters, the campaign, they are undermining the legitimacy, or trying to do so, of the incoming administration. Not just here in the United States, but in other countries that do not want to see democracy succeed. If you have this kind of chaos, small c, or this sort of litigation, questioning of the results, that to a lot of leaders who don't want to see democracy succeed in their countries, that's a great example to point to and be like, oh, you want democratic leadership? Look at that. So it's not even just undermining the Biden administration, it's also undermining the entire democratic process. And it's unlikely that the president and his supporters, his legal team, that they're going to stop crying foul after Inauguration Day. This is likely going to be something. We've seen the president's been pretty consistent in his message, regardless of the outcome in court, regardless of whether he has evidence to support these allegations. Even as members of his own party, members of his own administration contradict him, he's pretty wedded to this message, and it's unlikely it's going to end anytime soon. And that is bad news for the Biden administration and also for the democratic process.
And we'll have more from CBS White House correspondent Paula Reed coming up in just a few minutes, because speaking of the democratic process, there's a move afoot to wipe out all of Michigan's votes in the 2020 election, and some Michigan congressmen agree. That story when the Capitol Rundown continues. Earlier, we heard from Congressman Tim Walberg, and we heard him say that he doesn't accept that Joe Biden won the presidential election. What we didn't know when we talked to him is that he would later sign on to a lawsuit by the Texas Attorney General to invalidate the votes by the entire state of Michigan, as well as a few other states that voted for the president-elect. But we did ask Paula Reed about that lawsuit.
What do you make of the move by the Texas Attorney General to invalidate the votes from Michigan and of several other states that voted for Biden?
This is clearly a political move as opposed to a viable legal strategy. What he's asking here is he's asking the Supreme Court to declare President Trump the winner of the 2020 presidential race. He's arguing that states, falsely accusing states including Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin of counting invalid votes in violation of the Constitution. The remedy that he suggests is to invalidate all of the results and declare President Trump the winner. Look, the Supreme Court is not going to do that. Now, the Texas Attorney General, like many Texas Attorneys General, he is very partisan. He's very politically ambitious. This is politically for him a move to show his support for President Trump and for this fight. And what we've seen is that Republicans know that President Trump, after he leaves the White House, he will continue to be a force in the Republican Party. So a move like this, while it won't be successful in court, it is going to be probably politically successful by currying favor with President Trump.
And it's not just Tim Walberg. Representatives John Molinar, Jack Bergman, and Bill Huizenga are among more than 100 other Republican members of Congress who think the votes of 4 states ought to be invalidated. That's despite federal election officials, the FBI, and Donald Trump's own Attorney General, who say there is no reason to doubt the outcome of the election. When we come back.
You're so done. You should be swinging from the rope, you Democrats.
A Michigan representative gets some disturbing racist threats. So why is she in the legislative doghouse? The saga of Cynthia Johnson is next. Last week's hearing with Rudy Giuliani spawned several big stories, from the questions about the election to the coronavirus he brought to Michigan. It also led to racist attacks against lawmakers who took part. Democratic State Representative Cynthia Johnson posted some to her Facebook page.
You're so done. You should be swinging from the rope, you Democrats. You Democrats stealing the election. You deserve everything you get.
Johnson got a lot of attention for the posts. Then she got even more attention for a post she made on her own. In it, critics say she makes threats of her own.
So this is just a warning to you Trumpers. Be careful. Walk lightly. We ain't playing with you.
Johnson's video angered some Michigan House Republicans who promptly stripped her of her committee assignments. They said that, quote, threats to either Democrats or Republicans are unacceptable and un-American. They're even more unbecoming of an elected official. We have been consistent in our position on this. Violence and intimidation is never appropriate in politics. Behavior like this will not be tolerated this term or next. Governor Whitmer held a news conference on the COVID crisis on Thursday, but took a question on this topic, and she cited the pressure Representative Johnson has been under, then added this.
I think that removing her from her committees is too far, truly. And I've reached out and asked the incoming House leadership to reconsider that.
So we asked Kiara Lake to dig a little deeper with Capitol correspondent Tim Skubic on this issue.
Well, file this under Nothing Ever Good Happens on Facebook, and Representative Cynthia Johnson would be Exhibit A, as we've found out this week. She says her remarks were misinterpreted, and they were also spliced together to make it sound like something that it wasn't. And her whole point is that her life had been threatened. She was part of that committee meeting with Rudy Giuliani and asked some tough questions, and she got a whole lot of political flack for that. And so she went on Facebook and she said she had a warning for the Trumpers. And then she said to her supporters, we need to make them pay. But she also said earlier on in the Facebook post that she was mean by paying by hitting them in the pocketbook. Well, the problem for her was the House Republican Speaker, Mr. Chatfield, and the incoming Speaker, Mr. Wentworth, interpreted her remarks on Facebook as a threat. And therefore, as a result of a threat, they removed her from not one, not two, but 4 committees. And in recent hours now, we've heard from the Speaker-elect, who has sort of indicated that the expulsion from these committees might not carry over into the new year. So this thing may blow over, but it certainly got a lot of attention, and none of it was good for anybody.
All right, thank you, Tim. Coming up, it's not just Lansing. There is a lot going on in D.C. We check in with our Washington correspondent next. Well, it has been a crazy week in Michigan. It has also been a busy week in Washington. Congress has been working on 2 major projects. One is a budget, so we don't end the year with another government shutdown. And the other is a COVID relief package that could help cities, states, and the unemployed, among others. Here's Washington correspondent Raquel Martin with more on how that's going.
Lawmakers were able to pass a stopgap budget. That means that the government will stay funded for at least another week, but they will have to try and pass a larger plan or maybe another stopgap by next week on Friday to avoid it from shutting down again. So the clock is just reset. Now, right now, lawmakers have been trying to negotiate an omnibus bill that is the larger spending package that would keep the government funded all the way through next September. But we are still hearing optimism from both sides, saying that they believe that they will be able to fix these points of differences and pass a plan. It's just still unclear if they will make that deadline in time and, fill these gaps by the next deadline, which will be on December 18th.
There appears to be a lot of talk, but no action on a COVID relief bill. What's going on there?
Well, we started the week on a high note, but quickly realized we were back in a gridlock situation. The $908 billion compromise is still probably the most optimistic path forward, but Democrats and Republicans have some sticky points they cannot seem to get on the same page about. That includes liability protections for businesses and also local and state funding. Now, some lawmakers have volunteered potentially taking those 2 issues out of the broader piece so that something can pass. So right now, again, back in a gridlock situation. I know we're hearing from leadership that they could potentially work overtime to try to get something passed, especially seeing that these deadlines are approaching, but haven't heard any announcement from Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, about a potential schedule at this point.
And that's our show for this week. Thanks for watching the Capitol Rundown.